Shabbos Daf Mem Zayin. It takes us to the end of the third chapter of Masechta Shabbos. We can divide the Gemara until the end of the chapter into three distinct parts. First, we have a part discussing the halachos of muktzah, specifically the halacha of the basis ledavar ha'aser, a non-muktzah object, which is muktzah because it serves as a base for muktzah objects. The Gemara will have a specific question there and a few answers. Then the next part of the Gemara is talking about a totally different subject. It's discussing constructing a kli, which is collapsible, a device that can be taken apart and put back together. When you are or are not allowed to do that in Shabbos and what circumstances, those primary halachos are centered here. That takes us to a Mishnah, which takes us back to the halacha of Shabbos, of placing a bowl under a candle, but here the topic will not necessarily be so much muktzah as causing a fire to go out indirectly. That takes us to the end of the chapter, and the next parak is Bameh Taimnim, which begins with a Mishnah teaching us halachos of hatmana, insulating a pot to keep it warm, and with which materials you are and are not allowed to do that. So let's begin. The first topic which we will discuss is the halachos of muktzah. So a concept which we've seen earlier is basis ledavar aser. That's a functional non-muktzah object like a plate or a bowl or something, a basket, but it's got a muktzah object in it. Now the question which will be discussed here is, what if it has two objects in it? It's got one muktzah and one non-muktzah object in there. So what does the base count as? It's a base for both muktzah and non-muktzah. What happens to it? So it's really going to depend on which of the two objects in it is more important and more significant, as we will see throughout the daf. It should be noted that one is not allowed to cause muktzah objects to move. So even if you have a muktzah and non-muktzah object inside a bowl, and the bowl is considered to be permitted to move, you're supposed to knock out the muktzah object first. But let's see what the Gemara says. First of all, the Gemara begins with a quote with five people quoting each other. So you have Rabbi Zera quoting Rabbi Asi, quoting Rabbi Yochanan, quoting Rabbi Chanina, quoting Rabbi Rumnis, who says that Rebbe once allowed him to move a machta filled with ash. Now a machta is a device designed to burn incense. So you fill it with incense, and it's kind of covered. It's a metal object, and it's filled with incense. It has holes in the metal for the scent to escape, and you stick it in the fire, and it burns. So this incense, this device, this machta, had ash inside it. Now the ash is generally considered to be muktzah. It's useless. It's functionless. As we shall see soon, ash could be functional. It could be used to cover dirt or disgusting objects on the floor, but you would have to set it aside for that purpose beforehand. Here we're assuming so far that it was not set aside, so the ash is muktzah. And Rebbe said you're allowed to move the device, you're allowed to move the machta. So the question is why? It's a base for a muktzah object. So we're going to try three answers over here. We'll have trouble with the first two, and we'll settle on the third. So the first one is Rabbi Zera, who asked, how could Rebbe say that that's okay? How could Rebbe say that you're allowed to move a machta with muktzah in it? It should be a base for muktzah, as we shall see. In the case of, we have a Mishnah that says you're allowed to hold your son even though your son's holding a rock, and you're allowed to hold a basket if the basket has in it a stone. And Rav Yochanan said about that, it's only if there's a stone and fruit. So you see that it's only if there's a stone and fruit, so that the basket is holding both muktzah object, the stone, and non-muktzah objects, the fruit. That's where it's permitted, because the basket is holding two types of objects. But if it's holding just a muktzah object, just the stone would be forbidden. So that should be just like the case of the machta, which is holding just ash. So how come the basket holding just the stone is forbidden to move, as is the implication here, and the machta holding just ash is permitted to move? So the Gemara first says that Rabbi Zera, who had asked this question to Rav Asi, was quiet. He didn't know what to say. And after a while, he said, "Okay, so you're right. Your question is correct. It must be that the case of the machta that Rebbe said that Rabbi Rumnis is allowed to move was not just holding ash; it was also holding unburned spices. It had a couple of granules of unburned spices in there, and therefore it's just like the case of the basket, which is holding both a rock and some fruit." So Gemara says, "But hold on a second. Rebbe was the nasi. Rebbe was the prince, the leader of the generation, and he was fabulously wealthy. It cannot be that a couple of granules would be significant. It's totally insignificant, and therefore it should be as if it's not there." And maybe you'll tell me, well, it's significant to a poor person, but I'll prove to you that it doesn't go by random people in the street. when you want to consider something significant, it goes by who owns it. It has to be significant to its owner. And my proof is from the case of cloth. Cloth is only makabel tumah, can only become tameh if it's significant. Now, there are different sizes of cloth that might be significant. And we have a brisa that says it's got to be significant to its owner. What's significant to a poor person is not significant to a rich person. If it's too small to be significant to a rich person and it's owned by a rich person, it doesn't help that it's significant to a poor person. So you clearly see it's got to be significant to its owner. So these granules of unburnt incense is not significant to Rebbe, and therefore that would not explain why Rebbe said that you're allowed to move this machta with ash in it. It should be again like the stone in the basket without any fruit. So the Gemara tries another answer. Abai says this is a totally different halacha over here. This is not about the base for muktzah. The issue over here is that the ashes are disgusting. They're repulsive. And there's halacha that even if something's muktzah, as long as it's repulsive, you're allowed to move it. You're allowed to move repulsive things out of your living quarters. The classic example of that is if you have a kli, a bucket of some sort, which is designed to hold waste matter, and that waste matter, if it's in there and it smells and it's awful and it's horrible, you want to get it out, so you're allowed to move it out even though it's totally muktzah. So this should be just like that. Maybe that's why Rebbe said that you're allowed to move the machta with the ash in it. The ash is repulsive. So Rebbe says there's two reasons why that doesn't make sense. Number one, first of all, the case of the bucket is exposed, and here the ashes are covered, so it can't be repulsive enough to allow you to move it away. The second problem is that ashes are not repulsive. What's repulsive about ashes is not repulsive like a bucket of waste material. So the Gemara gives this third answer. The Gemara says, okay, so here's the story. The story was that the ashes were actually prepared for use beforehand. And they're not muktzah at all. The issue was that the ashes weren't what's muktzah. There were other things in that machta that was muktzah. There were pieces of unburnt wood there. Shards of wood are muktzah. The ash was not muktzah because somebody mentally or verbally prepared it in advance to use to cover dirt on the floor. And it's actually not muktzah. The reason why you're allowed to move this thing is because the ash that's in it is not muktzah. That's the permitted thing in it. It's the ash that makes it permitted to move the machta despite the fact that it has broken pieces of wood which are muktzah in it. So again, the machta is holding both muktzah and non-muktzah objects. The broken pieces of wood are muktzah, the ash is not muktzah. You're allowed to move it because of the ash. And it's just like the case of the kanuna. Kanuna is a movable torch of sorts that you could bring near somebody to warm him. It's like a movable heat source. And the kanuna has broken pieces of wood in it and ash. And Rabbi Nachman said that as long as the ash is not muktzah, because you have designated it before Shabbos to be used to cover things, so you're allowed to move the whole kanuna because of the ash that's in it. You don't have to worry about the muktzah pieces of wood in it. So this is the same story over here. So now the Gemara asks, but hold on a second. There should be like a case in a brisa. The brisa says that if you have a lamp, an oil lamp, and it has broken pieces of wicks in it, so both Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Yehuda in the brisa who argue about muktzah, they both agree that that thing is muktzah because the broken pieces of wick make it muktzah. So I don't understand you. Here you have wicks, you have broken pieces of wick and oil in a lamp, and you're telling me that it's muktzah. The fact that the oil is in there, which is not muktzah, doesn't make the whole contraption okay to move because the wicks are more important. So how could you tell me that if you have ashes and broken pieces of wood, that the broken pieces of wood are less important, and the whole thing is permitted to move because of the ashes which aren't muktzah? It shouldn't be true. The broken pieces of wood should be more important and make the whole thing gasser, just like the broken pieces of wick are more important and make the whole thing gasser. So my answer is that was a special case over there. That brisa was said in the Galil. In the Galil, people are very much valuing their wicks, even the broken ones, because they're made from flax, and flax is uncommon to come by in the Galil. That's why it's important over there. But generally, for the rest of us, flax is not so important, and broken pieces of wood are certainly not so important. Okay, so this takes us out of the discussion of muktzah, and now we go into a discussion of constructing kalim, constructing devices which are collapsible. They're meant to be taken apart and put back together. And there are a couple of potential issues here. Number one is the issue of binyan, building something. That's a machokes rishonim, whether it applies to kalim or not. According to Rashi, there's no such thing as building movable objects. Building only applies to things that are fixed. attached to the ground. So therefore, Rashi understands that this entire discussion is not talking about binyan, it's talking about makah b'patish, which is whenever you make something usable, you change it from non-usable to usable. The final step is a malacha d'oraisa called makeh b'patish. So the Gemara over here will discuss a couple of different types of devices that were built. They were collapsible and could be put back together. So the Gemara says that there was an incident. Levi bar Shmuel found Rabbi Abba and Rav Huna bar Chia at the doorway of Rav Huna's house, and he said, "Can you put back together a bed which is collapsible?" There were certain types of traveling worksmen. There were copper smiths and weavers, and they used to travel around with a bed that had a steel frame of sorts. I guess it was an iron frame, and it was in pieces, and it could be put together without screws or anything. It was just the pieces fit into each other. So are you allowed to put the bed together on Shabbos? So Gemara says that Rabbi Abba and Rav Huna, who he had asked, said it's mutter. On the other hand, Rabbi Yehuda quoted Rav and Shmuel, who said that it's an Isur d'oraisa. So now the Gemara brings a Mishnah. The Gemara has three cases here of collapsible things. You have a menorah that the branches could be taken out and put back in. You have a long rod that painters and plasterers used to use to reach high places and low places, so it was collapsible. You could add pieces onto it to extend it. And you also have a horn of some sort, a musical instrument that had reeds. So you could stick the reeds in. So there was a straight one and there was a round one. And the round one, the reeds went in firmly and they got stuck in. And the straight one, the reeds went in loosely and they stayed loose. But either way, the halach about these three things in the brisa is that if you put the branch in the menorah, then it's an Isur d'oraisa. The rod of the painter that's extendable, that is an Isur d'Rabbanan. And the musical instrument where you stick in the reeds, so the round one it's an Isur d'oraisa, and in the straight one it's an Isur d'Rabbanan. So either way, we see over here that the branches in the menorah is a Isur d'oraisa, and that seems to fit with the psak of Rav and Shmuel that said that putting the bed together is an Isur d'oraisa. So how could Rabbi Abba and Rav Huna bar Chia say that it was permitted? Say there wasn't anybody here that said that any of these things were mutter, that they were permitted. It's either an Isur d'oraisa or it's an Isur d'Rabbanan. So Gemara says, okay, you're right, but there's another brisa that gives us an opinion that says that there are circumstances in which it is permitted. This brisa is talking about inserting feet into a bed or a certain device which went under the feet to protect the wooden legs from rotting because of the moist earth. And there was another device that went into an arrow that went into the bow that you used to shoot an arrow that snapped on and that helped you guide the arrow. All these things, if you put them on, so it's a machlokes. So according to the Tanakh, it's an Isur d'Rabbanan, and it works as follows. You're not allowed to fix them on firmly. If you fix them on firmly, it's an Isur d'oraisa. If you put it on loosely, it's an Isur d'Rabbanan. Rav Shimon ben Gamliel says no, loosely is not an Isur at all. It is permitted. The explanation of the issue here is as follows: when you attach it firmly, so you've made it, and it's meant to stay there forever, and you've built the kli, and it's either binyan mekalim or it's makah b'patish, that's an Isur d'oraisa. You do it loosely, so you haven't built it, but the Tanakh says that's an Isur, that's forbidden midrabanan gzeira, that you may come to make it permanent. Rav Shimon ben Gamliel says as long as it's nice and loose, there's no such gzeira. So Rabbi Abba and Rav Huna held like Rav Shimon ben Gamliel that there's no such gzeira, and therefore they said in the case of the bed that they were asked about, it's okay because it's loose, it's not firm, and therefore you don't have to worry about it. There's no Isser of binyan bekalim. Now the Gemara has another discussion, which a similar incident. The Gemara says that Rabbi Chama had a a similar device. He had a bed that was also collapsible, and he would put it back together on Yom Tov. And somebody said to him, "How are you allowed to do that? If it's not an Isser Deraisa, at least it's an Isser Darabanan, as we see in the Tanakama of this Brisa." So he said, "No, I hold like Rav Shimon ben Gamliel. If it's as long as it's loose, it's not Asr. Even Midrabanan, it is permitted." That takes us to the Mishnah. The Mishnah goes back to the case of somebody who put a bowl under a dripping candle to catch the sparks that fell or the burning objects that fell, so that they wouldn't set fire to anything. So the Mishnah says you're allowed to put the bowl under the fire to catch the sparks. Just make sure that you don't fill the bowl with water, because then you're going to put the fire out. That those fires that fall will be put out. So the Gemara first asks, how are you allowed to put the bowl there? We said earlier a few daf ago that there's an isser called bitul kli mehechano, making a bowl unusable anymore. This bowl now has sparks in it. It becomes muktzah. You're not allowed to use it. So you're not allowed to put a kli in a situation where it becomes muktzah from now on. That's what Rav Chisda said. This Mishnah doesn't hold that way, so apparently it's a kasha on that. Rav Chisda, where it says, no, it's not a kasha. Rav Huna Beit Rav Yeshua says the sparks don't end up staying there. They don't have any actual substance. And therefore, you would be permitted to move the bowl. It wouldn't be muktzah afterwards. So then the Gemara wants to know, we said you can't put water in there. Now, if you would put water in there, the sparks would put themselves out. You didn't put the sparks out. So that's what we call gram kiboy, setting up a situation in which a fire goes out on its own. So we had a similar case where you have a fire, and you set up a wall of barrels containing water. And Rabbi Yossi had said you have to make sure not to use new clay barrels filled with water, because what's going to happen is when the fire approaches them, they will burst and drop the water on the fire, and the fire will end up putting itself out. That means you set up a situation where the fire puts itself out. You're not allowed to do that. The Tanakh said it's okay. So the Gemara seems to say, so now our case, where the Mishnah says that it's forbidden to set up the bowl for the sparks to put themselves out, is just like Rabbi Yossi, who says it's forbidden to set up the firewall, which will put the fire out by itself. So it must be that it's only Rabbi Yossi. So the Mishnah says, hold on a second, that can't be, because our Mishnah didn't say that it's usher only to do on Shabbos. It seems to indicate that you're not even allowed to do that before Shabbos. Rabbi Yossi would have said you're allowed to do it before Shabbos. So how could our Brisa be? How could our Mishnah be Rabbi Yossi? Our Mishnah says it implies, and we even have a Brisa that says so explicitly, you're not allowed to do that before Shabbos. So it couldn't be just because of Rabbi Yossi's opinion that you aren't allowed to set up a fire to put itself out on Shabbos. So the reasoning behind our Mishnah must be a different thing. It must be that if you were to put the bowl there actually on Shabbos, it's not that you're setting up the fire to go out by itself, you're actually putting the fire out with your hands. Why are you doing that? So Tosfos explains Rashi that in the second you should put the fire there, there actually may be a spark falling, and therefore you're catching it in the bowl, in your hand you're putting the fire out. That's not having the fire put itself out, that's you putting the fire out. Since that would be an Issa D'Oraisa, even putting it there before Shabbos is forbidden as a Gzeira, that situation might happen on Shabbos. Okay, this is the end of Perek Kira, the end of the third Perek. Now we begin the fourth Perek, which discusses the halachos of insulating a pot on Shabbos. We had said earlier that to insulate a pot before Shabbos in an object which creates its own heat, it generates heat, is forbidden. The reason is because you may end up, if we allow you to insulate a pot in something which adds heat, which generates its own heat, you may end up insulating in coals, and then you'll come to stoke the coals. So now this Mishnah, which begins the Perek, has a list of items which generate heat that you aren't allowed to insulate a pot with, and the list goes as follows. You're not allowed to use leftover pressed things. We don't know if this is sesame seeds or if it's olives. You're not allowed to use manure. You're not allowed to use salt, lime, sand, wet or dry. You can't use straw, grape skins. You can't use the stuffing people use for cushions, which is cotton, and you can't use wet grass, but you are allowed to use dry grass. So all the things which you aren't allowed to use generate their own heat as they decompose. So now, the Mishnah had said you can't use pressed residue of things that you pressed for oil. And we're not clear if that refers to pressed olives or pressed sesames. Olives, when they're pressed, generate more heat. And the question is, was it referring to sesames and therefore certainly olives you aren't allowed to use? Or was it referring only to olives but sesames you are allowed to use? So Gemara brings a proof. We had a discussion of Rabbi Zeira in the name of somebody in Rabbi Yanai's yeshiva. He said you are not allowed to take a box that has insulated food in it and place it on top of pressed olives. So you see, it's only olives. Sesames, which are not as hot, is not a problem. Someone says that's not a proof. There's not talking about insulating in the pressed olives. It's talking about placing something on top of the pressed olives. Only olives are hot enough to cause a problem if they're placed on top of. But as far as insulating, sesames would also be enough heat generating to cause a problem.